I was seated by the swing door when the microphone turned my daughter's lie into gospel. The room toasted the man who stood by Naomi after her father passed, while the father who paid for the lights, the power, and the safety of that very room disappeared into the clatter of trays. My phone still held her last text. "Dad, please don't talk about HVAC tonight." As if the life I built with burned hands and signed contracts was just a stain to be wiped before company arrived. Betrayal doesn't always slam a door. Sometimes it edits your name out of the sentence and expects you to fund the punctuation. I stood up then, not to make a scene, but to put a name where the work lived, and to see if joy could survive the truth. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Whitaker Street curled past Forsyth Park like a slow river of asphalt, and my old pickup eased along its bend, mirrors full of live oaks and lacework Spanish moss. Magnolia Hall rose ahead, white columns, brick walks, lanterns ready to glow when the sun slipped. I backed through the service entrance the way men like me always enter, where the cables coil, where the ice tubs sweat, where comfort is manufactured on purpose. The chiller trailer I'd rented hummed behind a hedge. I killed the engine and listened to the machine's steady breath as if it were a watchdog I'd trained. Inside, the air smelled of gardenias and cut limes. Two worlds were arriving at once. Up front, black SUV's door clicked and released linen suits and light laughter. Back here, steel racks rolled over tape marks on concrete, and a sous chef muttered counts of oysters and ramekins. A temp with a clipboard met me at a folding table and looped a black lanyard over my hand. It read vendor parent. I weighed it in my palm, father in my bones, vendor by their vocabulary. The placement board stood on an easel. A line of calligraphed names waltzed toward the dance floor. Mine was tucked by the catering swing door, a purgatory where trays flew and the ice machine coughed. It wasn't a surprise, it still landed like a thumb on a bruise. I pocketed the badge and stepped under the colonnade to catch a sliver of breeze. That's when I saw Naomi. Cream silk the color of sweet butter, turquoise pins catching Savannah light, a gown cut to skim the air without touching it. She was positioned between a column and a florist's arch, chin-tipped, a stylist smoothing the invisible. Our eyes met for the briefest electric beat. She looked away, not cruel, just busy with whatever story she needed this night to tell. A planner's voice crackled over a headset, cues, timings, names, said with a professional smile. I know what beauty costs because I've paid for it. I used to solder copper in crawl spaces with my jaw clenched against winter. I used to sweat through rooftops while asphalt softened under my knees. Over years, Bennett Mechanical and Restoration learned to answer emergencies faster than fear could spread. Fires, floods, silent systems on the hottest day of the year. We kept our permits clean, our insurance tall, our credit lines disciplined. The same signatures that bought compressors and scaffolds were now inked under tonight's arrangements. The ledger lived in my head, venue just north of 200,000, lighting and sound in the low 40s, catering above 90, florals and scenic in the mid-30s, temporary power and chiller shy of 20. Umbrella liability in the millions, riding on my company's back. The total near 510. One last tranche, 330,000, sitting in escrow like a balance valve, release upon public acknowledgement of the sponsor parents. It wasn't about applause. It was about saying a name where a name belonged. I found Mason Delaney near the ballroom doors, a radio on his belt and a pen behind his ear. We ran through the fire marshal's walk-through, the cold spark fountains queued for the first dance, the upload of certificates. I asked to see the transfer switch, and he led me to a tidy panel tucked behind a drape. My hand found the metal and felt the low vibration that says, "Power is ready, obedient, waiting to be told which branch of the tree to feed." Control doesn't have to shout, it can hum. Savannah's old rhythm filled the portico. Ice rattling into highballs, a snare tapping under brushed chords, a bartender slapping mint against his palm to wake it. The Carrington guests arrived in linens the color of sand and champagne. Coastal jewelry blinked like sunlight on water. They laughed easily, stepped around cables without seeing them, floated past the service corridor as if it were a backstage rumor. I am comfortable with sweat salt on my collar. They are comfortable never thinking about thermostats unless the room feels wrong. Small slights came dressed as efficiency. A junior planner corralled me toward the vendor entrance I had already used. A florist assistant pointed at a crate and asked if I could shift it, "Since you're strong." I lifted it to spare her back and to learn where they were storing dry ice. Usefulness is a language I'm fluent in. Invisibility is a dialect I refuse to accept without comment, even if the comment is only recorded in my chest. On a gust of colder air, a memory arrived. Naomi and I at a truck stop outside Macon, the day a rusted nail flattened her first tire. Grease on her cheek, my hand circling hers on a four-way wrench. Before that, FAFSA forms on a wobbly kitchen table, both of us doing math and hope. After that, a portfolio review where I held my breath while someone decided whether her drawings would buy her a doorway. None of those moments required an audience. All of them were vows. My phone buzzed, a short note from Aisha Caldwell, my attorney. Escrow Clause 7.4. Verbatim acknowledgement required, not implied. I'm on standby. I read it twice, not because I doubted the text, but because I wanted the calm of its measure. No one needs a fight in a room built for celebration. But if the line is crossed, then the instrument we tune together will play the note it was built to play. I circled back along the hedge where the chiller breathed and the generator kept its oath. In front, champagne was beginning to travel on mirrored trays, bubbles rising in neat, optimistic streams. The light dipped and turned the Spanish moss into 1,000 soft pennants. I set my palm against the transfer switch again, feeling the hum like a pulse. Comfort is not an accident. It is an agreement. Tonight would test whether this room could keep one. I took my seat by the swing door and let the machine's thrum count the seconds while I waited to see if my name would be allowed to live. From my table by the swing door, I heard the mic pop and settle. That small thunder before a voice learns how to live on electricity. Piper's crew counted down in hand signals, and the MC tested a line that bent wrong in my ear. The man who guided Naomi since childhood. A silver-haired stranger waited in a wash of honeyed light by the colonnade, sleeve creased, smile rehearsed. I didn't know his name yet. I knew the silhouette he meant to borrow. My phone vibrated against the linen. Naomi's text was careful as a surgeon. "Dad, please, no talk about mechanical or HVAC tonight. It matters to the Carrington guests, polite, precise, sanded of history." I typed 3 replies, one tender, one tired, one technical, then left the screen blank and turned it face down. Beyond the hedge, the chiller cleared its throat and kept breathing for the room that didn't know its name. Piper Malone arrived in a drift of perfume and clipboard confidence. She thanked me for the generous support, a phrase shaped like a bow, and floated a promise. "We'll roll general acknowledgments at the end. It keeps momentum." I asked without edge, "Will my name be spoken?" Her headset winked. "We don't want to over-program the emotion." Velvet words, no anchor. I opened Aisha Caldwell's thread and reread the compass steel of Clause 7.4. Explicit, on-mic acknowledgement of the true sponsor parents before release of the $330,000 in escrow. Not a slide, not a nod in passing. Words audible and unambiguous. I starred the message the way a foreman chalks a stud before driving a screw. Across the path, Vivian Carrington guided the silver-haired man to Naomi as if placing the final flower in an arrangement. Cameras clattered. He leaned into a paternal half-hug, and Naomi's smile, locked like a frame, pressed snug against a wall. My eye caught what photographs can't hold, shoulders half an inch too high, hands hovering instead of resting, the stylist hovering too, shielding a trimmer in silk. The image would travel clean. The truth would stay here, untagged. Mason Delaney crossed behind me, talking into his radio in a low current. Fire marshal greenlit, cold spark housing sealed, temporary power tree steady. He glanced over, I nodded. Every certificate sat under Bennett Mechanical and Restoration, and he knew it. We share a dialect in this trade, signatures, amperage, clearances, the quiet grammar of things that keep people safe while they clap. At the courtyard's edge, Theo Park adjusted exposure until the oaks turned velvet and the gowns soft cream. He framed Naomi with the stranger, then panned in a line that erased the service corridor where I sat. He saw me see him, dipped his chin, and returned to his mark. Cameras don't lie, they choose which truths to include. A Carrington cousin drifted over with a highball and easy weather in her voice. "Are you with production?" she asked. "We love what you've done with the lighting." By you, she meant a village of rentals and labor paid from a checking account that carries my name. "Glad it feels right," I said. Her gratitude belonged to the room, which is to say, to no one in particular. Behind a column, Piper coached the MC, words tuned like tools. "Say the man who stood by Naomi, not father. It tests better." Wrong wrench, and you strip the bolt. I wrote the phrasing in my notes next to numbers for static pressure, as if I might need to prove later that language had been engineered to erase me politely. Another ping from Aisha. "You're within rights to hold escrow if they dodge the clause." Sit tight. Let them choose, not a dare. A reminder that leverage hums best when your hand stays off the obvious switch. Program cards circulated, thick stock with a little tooth that caught the light. I scanned the order handed down the row, welcome, vows, jazz interlude, toast from the Carrington matriarch, first dance, then gratitude moment, pinned at the very end just before the spark fountains. Tactically perfect, emotions peaked, scrutiny dipped, a place where people cry too easily to hear whether a necessary name is missing. The sun slid lower and Magnolia Hall shifted from white to honey, the kind of color painters chase for years. Champagne lifted in arcs, bubbles rising like disciplined hope. Naomi tilted her head into the brightness beside the stranger who would look like a father on any feed that never asks for receipts. I sat with the hum of machines I had rented, with the receipts I had signed, with the plain sentence that would govern the rest of the night. Either the room spoke my name or the room learned what happens when comfort stops being invisible. The generator kept its oath behind the hedge, the transfer switch waited in quiet readiness behind a drape. I could trace every circuit that fed their laughter, every policy number that made their bravado safe. I would not grandstand. I would not beg. I would measure the room's honesty against the legal line I'd drawn. And if they crossed it, let the system do precisely what it was designed to do. The sentence came dressed in velvet and stabbed like a nail. The MC, voice butter smooth under the portico, offered the room a soft, focused preface. Naomi's devoted guide after her father passed. A sympathetic hush rolled outward, then the front rows breathed one long collective "oh." I didn't move. I watched the sound travel across glassware, cling to the rims of champagne, and settle like dust in the dim. Behind my shoulder, the generator lifted half a note to meet the influx of bodies. The chiller deepened its tone. Physics steady a man when the story tries to undo him. Air in, heat out. Every watt bought with a signature. Every signature mine. I laid a palm on the tablecloth to quiet the tremor that wanted to announce itself in my fingers and let machinery write a bass line under the lie. Mason Delaney found me between songs, radio at his hip, pen still tucked behind his ear. He spoke just above the hum. Fire marshals cleared. Cold sparks sealed. Temp power holding. I saw the program, gratitudes at the end. No judgment in his eyes, only the practical compassion of a man who understands systems and the people they serve. I nodded once. We both knew what the clause required and when the test would come due. My phone lay face down, but I turned it over and typed a single reply to Naomi. The only sentence I trusted my hands to send without bleeding more. I won't talk HVAC. I will insist on my name once. I hit send, blacked the screen, set it beside the knife and fork I hadn't touched. Piper drifted past with the practiced breeze of someone who can retime a night with a smile. "Acknowledgements will land better after Mrs. Carrington's toast," she said, headset glinting like jewelry. Land better. The phrase sat in my chest like a door eased shut on a soft latch. "Understood," I answered, not because I agreed, but because I wanted the exact words preserved in the room where they were spoken. A ping from Aisha blinked onto the glass, clean bullets like rivets, explicit, on-mic acknowledgement required before escrow release. No implied language. Any deviation voids disbursement. Document everything. Say nothing unnecessary. I forwarded the note to my archive and starred it twice. Then I opened my voice recorder and set it quietly on the linen. If a room chooses to forget, I prefer to remember with proof. A Carrington cousin slid into my orbit with a smile and a highball. "Tragic what happened to Naomi's dad," she said, voice warm with borrowed empathy. "Bless her heart." I let the words pass like a summer shower over brick. Stories harden fast when they're poured at table height. Once the set begins, it takes a chisel to free the truth without cracking anything load-bearing. I wasn't ready to swing yet. The trio slid toward cocktail standards. Program cards began their migration along the linen. I underlined the last item, gratitude moment, and wrote in my small block script, "If name absent, escrow holds." 9:15. I reset my watch to buzz at 9:05 and again at the line. The numbers steadied my breath the way duct static does when you hit the sweet spot on a balanced system. Then my phone flashed a different kind of notice, the kind that makes your tongue go dry even before your mind catches up. A shared doc alert from a grant administrator replying to a thread between Vivian and Piper, thanking Bennett Mechanical and Restoration for participating in the event's Renewable Ready HVAC efficiency certification. Language I had never authorized. A PDF was attached. I opened it and scrolled, each thumb flick peeling back a layer of appropriation. There were my load calculations, my SEER benchmarks, a maintenance schedule lifted almost word for word from our service packets. Someone had repackaged my sweat as their virtue. I saved the file, stamped it with time and location, and forwarded it to Aisha with 2 words: unauthorized usage. The room stayed pretty, the lie stayed warm, but a new current ran under everything now, cold and clean as groundwater. Money is leverage. So is compliance. So is reputation when someone pins your name to a banner you didn't ask to fly. I looked up and traced, without touching, the path from generator to distro to branch circuits, to the dimmers that bathed Charles Whitaker in honey and erased the service corridor where I sat. I could pull any thread in that weave. I didn't need to. Systems are most honest when you let them proceed to their designed conditions. A clause is a valve. You reach for it only when the gauge tells you the line is out of spec. I built a folder on my phone and named it plainly, Savannah, Wedding Evidence. I dropped in a photo of the program card, the audio clip of After Her Father Passed, the compliance confirmations Mason had signed off on, and the green grant email with its borrowed numbers and my company's good name. The folder felt light in the hand and heavy in the mind. The sky deepened to indigo. Fairy bulbs woke to full power. Naomi stood near the colonnade with the man they were teaching the room to see as a father. I reset my watch and listened to the generator's vow. When the alarm kissed my wrist at 9:05, I didn't stand. I tasted the last of the air my machines had tempered and thought about the difference between being needed and being named. I wasn't here to grandstand. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to measure the room's honesty against a legal line drawn months ago in a different calm. If the line held, we would all go home with our stories intact. If it didn't, the system I built would do exactly what it was designed to do, and the night would learn how much truth a beautiful room can carry when the comfort stops being invisible. I walked the service corridor to reset the instrument inside my chest. The concrete was cool where the air from the chiller lapped the floor, and the generator's rhythm steadied into something I could count. 4-beat inhale, 4-beat exhale. I told myself the same thing I told Tex heading into a flooded crawl space. Slow is clean, clean is safe. Tonight needed slow. Back at the swing door, I drafted and deleted 3 messages to Naomi before I let the only one that mattered go. I promised I wouldn't mention HVAC or my trade to anyone, promised I wasn't here to embarrass her, and asked for the single sentence we had agreed to months ago, an explicit, on-mic acknowledgement of her true sponsor parents. I kept it short because precision survives where emotion burns off. The phone felt heavier after I sent it, as if the words had their own gravity. Piper drifted by with a headset tilt and a clipboard tucked to her ribs like a violin. I stepped into her slipstream, thanked her for keeping the trains on time, and quoted Clause 7.4 verbatim. She smiled like a good hostess, the kind that can steer a conversation without leaving fingerprints. "We'll offer a beautifully general gratitude after Mrs. Carrington's toast," she said. I answered softly, "General won't satisfy the clause." She reached for the comfort of tone. "We don't want to overprogram the emotion." I asked for confirmation in writing. She slid her eyes to a phantom email and said, "I'll circle back." The words were satin over a locked door. The colonnade gave me a sliver of shade and the sound of forks being rolled into napkins. Vivian Carrington stood near a planter of white azaleas, receiving compliments as if they were duty and tribute. I met her halfway where the noise softened and the cameras didn't reach. I kept my palms open and my voice in the register I use for load calculations. One exact line acknowledging Harold Bennett and Bennett Mechanical and Restoration as Naomi's sponsor parents and safety underwriters, I said. In exchange, immediate escrow release. Her smile grew warmer, which somehow felt colder. "We prefer not to overprogram the emotion," she said, repurposing Piper's language with superior polish. "Family is a feeling, not a form." I let the sentence sit between us until even she could hear its emptiness. "Feelings don't pay insurance," I said, and added nothing more. Mason called me to the ballroom threshold for a compliance refresh. He needed a duplicate upload of the umbrella liability and the Cold Spark timing note for his city file. I sent both by airdrop and email, then watched our company name populate another log in clean black letters. He glanced up. "Everything you sent is tight." The sentence carried more support than sympathy. It meant the floor I was standing on would hold. I made a private vow right then. They could sand my trade out of the night, but not my name. I framed it to myself the way I talk about air quality. Gratitude has to be breathable. Euphemisms suffocate. If I walked away unnamed, I would be teaching Naomi the wrong physics. I would be teaching her that comfort comes from nowhere and is owed to no one. By the swing door, 2 familiar faces in vendor black passed with a nod, Savannah folks who had seen me at 3 a.m. when a pipe ruptured behind a bakery. One of them murmured, "You saved my walk-in last summer." A homeowner I'd once helped after a storm-squeezing rain through a cracked seal recognized me too and pressed my arm in thanks. I didn't recruit them. I didn't hint at trouble. I let the ordinary current of gratitude wash over a day that was trying to pretend gratitude was optional. Between trays of champagne, I reopened the green PDF and read the theft like a weather report. My load calcs, my SEER benchmarks, my maintenance schedule, copied and pasted into a grant application that polished the Carrington brand. I filed the timestamps and closed the blade. Not yet. A tool is only true if you use it at the right torque. Aisha texted a templated note I could send with one tap to the escrow agent if the room dodged the clause at the scheduled segment. A formal hold citing 7.4 with contemporaneous evidence attached. "You need only press and send," she wrote. I typed back 2 words, "on standby," and put the phone in my inside pocket where good decisions live. Piper shifted the run of show by half a step. The gratitude moment moved 1 slot later to keep momentum. Her email explained it with cheerful efficiency and no apology. I logged the change. Exact language, 1 sentence, on mic, I replied, and received a non-committal emoji-free "noted." It is a special skill to write the word that means nothing and everything at once. Naomi's answer arrived fractured and honest. "I'll try," she wrote. "There's pressure. Please don't make a scene." I stared at the text until the letters blurred, then sent the only reply that didn't betray either of us. I won't make a scene. I will keep an agreement. The distance between us climbed my ribs and settled under my collarbone, a weight you don't see until you try to breathe around it. The transfer switch waited behind a drape near the portico, a metal animal with a loyal hum. I walked past and set my fingers on its skin the way a pilot taps the fuselage before takeoff. Systems exist to enforce design when courtesies fail. I have never liked using force where balance will do. But I am old enough to know that balance is not the same as surrender. Servers fanned out with fresh champagne. The jazz trio tightened their tuning for Mrs. Carrington's toast. I returned to my seat by the swing door with the generator's rhythm stitched into my breath and the escrow message sitting in my pocket like a sealed envelope. I had offered the gentle route in 3 languages: legal, logistical, and human. I had asked for one sentence: no fanfare, no crowns, just a name placed where a name belongs. I would accept silence about my work the way I accept sweat under a suit. I would not accept erasure. The night leaned toward its hinge. I folded my hands, felt the tremor quiet, and waited for the room to decide whether it could speak the truth under its own lights. If those quiet boundaries and measured moves made sense to you, please comment number 4 to tell me you're here. The hinge is about to turn. The band tagged a bright little figure and the servers froze mid-stride, each with a tray haloed in bubbles. Vivian Carrington stepped under the portico lanterns as if they had been invented to flatter her, and the microphone settled into her hand like old money finds a pocket. "To the man who stood by Naomi after her father passed," she said, the syllables lacquered to a gloss that made them slide down easy. The room exhaled in sympathy. Somewhere a flute kissed tile and shattered into glitter. My watch pulsed 9:05 against my wrist. I stood without hurry, palms empty, and walked the colonnade's shadow line. I lifted a flat hand toward the MC, an electrician's gesture for hold. He blinked, then deferred. I felt Mason Delaney drift in from the wing, not to block, just to clear the lane. Piper's headset chatter spiked in the air like static. She started forward and then arrested herself when she saw Mason plant one foot and look past her toward the venue captain. The room waited, trained by decades of ceremonies to obey whoever held the mic. "I'm Harold Bennett," I said into the mesh, steady as a level on a sill. "I'm Naomi's father." Gasps folded through linen, a chair leg skittered. Someone did the math out loud, "Oh my God," and then swallowed the rest. Under it all, the generator held its pitch, a faithful animal that knows only duty. Theo Park's camera clicked up from waist height and stabilized, eyeglass to eyeglass. Facts, not drama. I held my phone toward the light, the escrow agreement already open to clause 7.4. The language was clean enough to shave with. Explicit, on-mic acknowledgement of the true sponsor parents before release of the remaining $330,000. I let the numbers rest between us like hardware on a shop cloth. Bennett Mechanical and Restoration, I said, is the insured party of record. Our umbrella and temporary power permits underwrite your comfort. Our contribution brings the total sponsor value to approximately $510,000. Mason gave one small nod at the permit numbers, a quiet stamp that told the room I wasn't guessing. The faces evolved, sympathy softening into calculation. The Carrington row went rigid the way a sail goes hard when the wind shifts. Naomi's shoulders dropped a fraction. Her hands, clenched a moment before, loosened and found one another in a gentler grip. She was breathing again, and I couldn't tell if the breath carried relief, dread, or both. Charles Whitaker, his cufflinks precise, his roll imprecise, edged half a step back, as if the lens had uninvited him. Vivienne arrived beside the mic with a smile specifically engineered to domesticate crisis. "Let's not disrupt a joyful night," she said, laying velvet over the fuse. "Joy survives truth," I answered, not raising my voice. "Say my name as the contract requires, and escrow releases immediately." Piper whispered into the headset channel about acknowledging all supporters, a catch-all net with holes you could drive a truck through. "General thanks do not satisfy 7.4, I said, and I watched the phrase float over the room and settle. You could see people hearing it for the first time, explicit acknowledgement, an idea you can't unknow once it has a body. Theo flipped from stills to a live stream. The red dot in his reflection came alive. "Father steps forward at Savannah Society wedding," read the caption. Comments sparked like summer lightning on a horizon line. "Name him. Contracts matter. Don't hijack a wedding. Respect the dad." Viewer counts rolled upward, and for the first time all evening, the Carringtons seemed to understand that rooms are porous. Stories spill. I did not draw the second blade. I only ran my finger along its sheath. "My company's name appears on compliance and safety," I said, "and nowhere else without permission." A flicker passed from Vivian to Piper, the kind of eye movement men in my trade read when a compressor lies about its age. They knew I had found their borrowed virtue and that it had my letterhead under it. Mason stepped to a side mic for one sentence because institutions speak best in handfuls of words. "Permits and safety certificates for this event are logged under Bennett, Mechanical and Restoration. No politics in it, no applause line, only ledger." It was the tone of a torque spec, numbers and consequence married into a posture. I could have set the room on fire with anger. Instead, I set a clock. "We are minutes from the scheduled gratitude moment," I said. "If my name is spoken as agreed, we proceed. If it isn't, escrow remains held. Either way, I'll keep the room safe." I rehung the mic on its clip. No drop, no flounce. I took 2 steps back and stood where a father stands when his usefulness has finally become visible. The comment stream skittered faster, strangers turning into a jury of eyes with nothing in common but curiosity and a finger to flick the feed north. Piper reshuffled cards at the edge of the lights, paper whispering like a deck cut under pressure. Charles faded toward an architectural shadow, his borrowed place swallowed by actual structure. Vivian's smile thinned into the truth of itself. Naomi looked straight at me as if trying to read a diagram on my face and find an exit that didn't collapse the roof. My watch kissed bone again, a second pulse, quieter and nearer to 9:15. I could feel the power tree in my fingertips without touching it, could trace from generator to distro to dimmers to the strings of Edison bulbs that made Savannah into a painting. Systems don't care about feelings. They honor design. Tonight design was simple. A name said where it belonged, or a valve that did exactly what a valve does. The machine held its oath behind the hedge. The live stream counted hearts in the corner of a screen. Between them, a daughter weighed a sentence against a history. "I have spent a life making rooms livable. Sometimes that means air people never think about. Sometimes it means speaking into a microphone you didn't ask to hold." I waited, hands open, steady as a plumb line, and let the room decide whether comfort would remain invisible or truth would borrow its voice. Silence held like a pane of glass just before the crack. The band hung on a soft chord, the servers froze with flutes tilted, and the courtyard air seemed to wait for the next lawful breath. My watch read 9:12. Somewhere behind the hedge, the generator kept its oath, a patient animal that doesn't care about gossip. Piper huddled with Vivian at the edge of the portico, their heads close, temple to temple, as if a different story might be willed into being if whispered prettily enough. Charles Whitaker drifted backward until architecture took him in, a shadow reclaiming the shape it had loaned to a man. Vivian moved first, a palm to Naomi's elbow, the smile for the audience welded in place while her eyes worked the private hinge. I could read the urge, soothe, delay, promise a later that never arrives. The live stream counter on Theo's phone climbed like mercury on July brick. Even if Naomi couldn't see the numbers, she could feel a tension changing temperature, hot enough to blister, honest enough to purify. Piper fed the MC a universal gratitude line through her headset, the kind of soft net that catches nothing you can name. I shook my head once, not to the room, just to the moment trying to pass for principal. Aisha's templated texts waited on my screen, 2 buttons like twin valves. Hold and release. I set a gentle alarm for 9:14:30 and another for 9:15. The law was the lever. The transfer switch behind the drape was only its quiet cousin. I steadied my breathing to the machine I had rented and the machine I had designed months ago with the signature. Design is mercy when tempers want spectacle. The MC lifted the mic and announced a moment of gratitude, the phrase too smooth by half. Naomi's face went still, and then a sequence of small things occurred, too quick for anyone who hadn't tucked her in, taught her to turn a wrench, waited outside interviews while strangers graded her future. Her shoulders sank a fraction, as if a backpack she'd forgotten she wore had finally slid to the floor. Her hands, always composed, found each other and didn't interlace. They rested palm on palm like someone measuring pulse. She looked at me. No pleading there, just a calibration against a memory that knew the sound of my breath when I was pretending not to worry. Before Vivian could reclaim the mic, Naomi took it. The first syllable caught like a shirt on a nail, then released. "Thank you to my father, Harold Bennett," she said, voice clear as a level on a sill. "And to Bennett Mechanical and Restoration, who underwrote the safety, the power, and so much of this night. No decorations, no apologetic laugh, just a name in the right place like a beam in a wall." I tapped release. The message to the escrow agent flew. A confirmation slid back like a bolt seating. Funds initiated. The law did what the law was built to do. I nodded once toward Mason at the wing. He returned the nod without smile or flourish, then signaled to his team. The Cold Spark housings would arm on schedule, the power would stay smooth, the room would remain held in the comfort it had rented from my company and earned with a sentence. Applause rose not in a roar but in a rising breath, a tide that knew when to be respectful. Some faces stayed still, choreography offended by an unscripted truth. Others softened as if a weight had been named and therefore could be set down. Theo's comments scrolled. "That's the line." He asked for one sentence. "Respect. Weddings aren't courtrooms, honor matters." The split was honest. I could live with honest. I did not move toward the center or lift a hand for praise. I didn't bow. I stood where I was, next to a swing door that had kissed more elbows than any aisle in the room, and let the quiet travel back to work. This was never conquest. It was compliance. It was a system clicking into the notch where it belongs, a thermostat making the small decision that keeps a house inhabitable. Vivian took the mic with a smile that had been trimmed by reality. She thanked all who contributed, a wide embrace meant to dilute. Then, too late, a tag, including Mr. Bennett, added like sugar sprinkled over a dish that was never savory. The room heard the order of operations. The recording had already assigned credit where the contract required. You can sand an edge, you cannot uncut a beam. I found Piper's eyes and gave a small, neutral nod, the sort men use on scaffolds to say the load is shared and the bolts are tight. It carried a second message, too. I had seen the green paperwork with my company's name braided into a virtue it didn't consent to. I had not drawn that blade. I wouldn't unless asked to bless another theft. She understood. Some lessons are learned in whispers held under pressure. Naomi turned a degree toward me, not enough to make a tableau, just enough to acknowledge the path she had crossed back to. There was no smile yet. Relief and grief can share a face and look like composure from far away. I tipped my chin once, the way you thank a colleague who stayed late to lock a job that mattered. Small respect, no interest charged. The band, grateful for a runway, took the cue and slid into the first dance. Mason's two fingers lifted and dropped. The cold sparks coughed to life in tidy silver rain without smoke. Edison bulbs warmed the oaks into a painting people will remember as romance, even if they cannot say why the air felt better a few minutes ago. The answer would be simple. Someone put a name where a name belonged, and the room's oxygen improved. My watch ticked past 9:15. Theo's counter kept clacking higher, but the hinge had already swung. I watched champagne move again, those small, celebratory rivers that require pressure, ice, and timing, and thought about how many nights of my life had been spent ensuring other people's comfort while my own went unremarked. This night didn't fix history. It fixed a sentence. That was enough design for one chapter. I stood at the margin as fathers do, feeling the chiller's low breath through the hedge like the steadying of a horse. If anyone asked later what happened, I would say the room chose the truth and kept the party. The law released what it held. The power stayed clean. The story learned how to carry its own weight. And somewhere in the space between a daughter's voice and a machine's hum, we earned another hour of air together. When the last plume of cold spark fell and the band eased into something soft for the older crowd, I stepped back to the service corridor and let the room reclaim itself. The generator relaxed a half step, the chiller settled into an even breath, and the fatigue I'd been holding out of my shoulders walked in like an old friend. In pockets and Ubers, Theo's stream replayed in loops, my sentence, Naomi's sentence, then the room learning how to carry both. You could see the story refracted on faces as they scrolled, relief for some, offense for others. The petite fours went out anyway. Work does not cancel itself because feelings take the mic. In the loading lane, the night sorted people into the two Savannahs I know. A caterer lead squeezed my forearm in thanks and went back to counting racks. Two AV techs gave me the small nod reserved for men who keep the lights from lying. Carrington guests moved past with mouths narrowed, the kind of expression you use when a waiter sets down the wrong vintage. Mason shook my hand once, firm, brief, professional. He didn't say good job, he didn't need to. Compliance is its own compliment. Morning came the way Savannah mornings do, with humidity unrolling like a banner before the sun. Social pages ran with the clip, father named at Magnolia Hall, wedding after erasure line. The comments split along a seam I could have drawn the night before. Restraint praised on one side, decorum scolded on the other. Theo posted a follow-up about the clause, crisp and factual. The view count climbed as if curiosity had its own barometer. By 10, my phone held messages from planners and managers who actually read their contracts. Some were careful, testing the wind, appreciate your professionalism last night. Others were direct. Need a maintenance proposal for 3 properties. Can you meet Tuesday? I also found 3 anonymous sneers about blue-collar drama. I archived them the way you file noise near a machine. Note the frequency. Wear ear protection. Get back to the work that pays. Vivian called from a blocked number, her voice sugared to a viscosity you could pour. She implied distress, hinted at claims, floated the idea that my publicity had caused her harm. I logged the timestamp, wrote 2 lines in my notebook, and forwarded a note to Aisha. Aisha replied with a memo built like a truss. I had publicized nothing that wasn't recorded in a ceremony I paid to make safe. My conduct aligned with contract terms and safety duties. Say little. Keep files, she added. I said little. I kept files. Whispers circled on the planner net. Piper was being pressed about why the acknowledgement kept sliding. A few vendors pulled soft commitments off her board, not because anyone loves a fight, but because no one enjoys tripping a clause at 9:15. I sent her a short, neutral line. Keep your files clean and your phrasing exact. It wasn't a rebuke, it was the kind of sentence that leaves a bolt properly set. Through the grapevine, I caught the outline of the fight Naomi and Julian were having in the echo of the night. He framed it as PR damage. She called it telling the truth. I didn't call her. Silence can be punishment. It can also be respect. I wanted the air to clear before I tried to measure what had shifted. The escrow agent confirmed disbursement before lunch. Venue and key vendors settled in a rush of tidy emails. Even a small overtime error from the band corrected itself without argument. Proof that rooms learn to read the fine print once they learn the fine print exists. Numbers moved how numbers move when the story has stopped trumpeting. Then the city knocked, polite and exacting. An inspector emailed after watching the stream. The cold spark effect, they said, had been struck from an early draft and reinserted by planner revision. They needed assurance the proper certificates were in force at the moment of effect. Mason attached the umbrella policy and device certifications already uploaded and confirmed what the video itself implied. The only reason the effect was allowable was because my coverage and permit sat in place when the housing spat silver. The hypothetical came into focus. Without those papers, the inspector would have shut the effect down and likely the event along with it. Irony does good work when it has documentation. The live stream had preserved the chain of custody of safety. Theo posted a clean explainer. Why the wedding didn't get shut down, the father's permits. The tenor shifted. People who had circled decorum as a shield began to admit that comfort is not a vibe. It is engineering plus law. A small arts nonprofit slid into my messages. We need a safety sponsor for our courtyard gala. Can we talk? I wrote back yes, then called my foreman to check crew capacity for the next quarter. Work expands to fill the space that respect opens. Aisha gathered the record the way a good carpenter grabs every length that matters. Program card photo, audio of after her father passed, escrow clause, time-stamped release, inspector thread. She advised a single public line if asked. We honored the agreement. We kept the room safe. Systems, not speeches. I agreed. You can win an argument and lose the principle you meant to defend. Better to point to the beam and let people see why the ceiling didn't fall. Human-scale aftermath arrived with a pastry box. The bakery owner, whose walk-in I'd saved after a storm, brought glazed rings warm enough to fog the shop window. My crew joked like they always do, then wiped their hands and went back to dispatch. I drafted a note to Naomi I didn't send, a single sentence about oxygen and names. I saved it in drafts. Not every repair wants same-day service. In the quiet back channels where influence keeps its shoes clean, I heard doors bump. A museum committee seat Vivian counted on turned to be determined. A donor circle relocated to another home with less noise in its corners. No headlines, just hinges learning new music. More than once that second night, I reached for the phone to say I'm proud and let my hand fall. Pride is real. Sometimes it spins better in future minutes, earned a little at a time. I went back to estimates and permits because work is how people like me metabolize both praise and insult. The chiller does not read reviews, it reads amperage. At dusk, I drove past Magnolia Hall. Another band was sound checking. Other names were being lettered in careful script that will wash off with rain. The Oaks didn't remember us. Machines only remember their duty. I pictured Naomi somewhere quiet, the weight of a microphone still in her hand, a sentence replaying in her own chest like a metronome set to humane. The night had ended. The consequences had begun. The design held. That was enough for Monday. After 2 days of noise, I did the plainest thing I know. I went back to work. Estimates waited in a red folder, a storm claim needed photos, and the dispatch board blinked in a language that only steadies when someone answers it. Pride was there, sure, sitting in the chair across my desk like a guest who doesn't eat much. I didn't feed it. I signed 2 purchase orders, called a vendor about a back-ordered coil, and let the hum of chargers and shop radios rinse away whatever victory wanted to turn into a parade. On the third morning, Naomi texted asking for 5 minutes in a place without spectators. No demands, no apology paragraphs, just a time and a coffee shop off Whitaker with stools that wobble and a chalkboard that always smudges the E. I chose late morning when the rush is gone and the tourists are still figuring out maps. I arrived first and took the corner seat by the window, the one where you can see who's coming before they find you. She came in without costume. Jeans, a cotton shirt, hair pulled back into something practical. She sat, palms flat on the tabletop, long enough to feel the grain, and said she wasn't here to rewrite the wedding or to ask for forgiveness. She wanted work that was real and a path she could walk without pretending. She said she was afraid to be recognized from the clip and to fail at unpretty tasks. I let the quiet stay a beat. Silence is respect when you use it to listen. Ground rules first. We would not relitigate microphones. We would not trade blame. We would talk about the next hour, then the next day. I laid out a chair and a wage and a clock. Residential Services Coordinator Junior, $42,000 a year, 90-day probation, no executive parking and a lot full of vans. Start on time, 1 rotating early shift, occasional Saturday. Take the dispatch line, log work orders, schedule techs, check van inventory, get model numbers right, write clean follow-ups, use the de-escalation script when someone who hasn't slept starts yelling about a leak that won't wait for manners. Report to a younger manager and do not skip the chain of command because your last name matches the sign over the door. I told her what it is not. It is not theater where guilt wears a hair shirt. It is not a shortcut to anyone's esteem. It is a job with measurable edges. The yardsticks are boring on purpose. Error rate under a number the software will calculate without flattery. Response times recorded. One weekly report that reads like a person who actually saw the day. I would not be her boss. I would not let cruelty sneak in under the door with the gossip. Trust gets earned in minutes, not in speeches. Before we signed anything, I taught a small lesson I wish someone had given me when I was young. Borrowed virtue is theft. There are clean files, and there are files that make future you hate past you. I did not open the Sustainability Grant PDF on my phone, though it sat there like a blade in a sheath. I told her my name had been braided into paperwork it never consented to. She nodded and said she understood the difference between a logo and a signature. I believed her enough to move to the next step. Aisha drew the offer letter with a conflict of interest acknowledgement so nobody could accuse either of us of running a family side door. Naomi read and signed. We shook hands the way coworkers do when they know the job begins when the ink dries, not after the congratulations. The shop floor is an honest teacher. I walked her through the dispatch bay where radio traffic braids with the sound of parts bins and printers. We passed the cages where expensive things live, the whiteboard that says no heroics, and the wall of laminated checklists that turn chaos into something you can fix. The foreman gave her the blunt tour: where to stand, what not to touch, which questions save everyone time. A tech recognized her from the video, offered a nod, and slid her a label printer. Work absorbed the rumor the way dry ground drinks the first rain. She shadowed a senior coordinator for 3 calls, a condensate line in a senior's apartment where patience is part of the toolkit, a warranty compressor swap with a vendor rep who tried to make policy into personality, a post-storm dehumidifier deployment where homeowners needed both equipment and a steady voice. Naomi learned to translate shorthand, to ask for model numbers before she promised a timeline, to apologize correctly when the first answer is no. I watched her the way I would watch any trainee. She arrived 5 minutes early, took notes in letters you can read without frowning, asked one good question per task instead of a flood that makes a teacher lie. I left a sticky note that said, "Good catch on filter size and nothing else." Praise is a spice. You measure it with 2 fingers, not a shovel. She mentioned terse messages from Julian. I didn't take the bait. I said, keep your files and your hours and let patterns reveal themselves. The shop is not a courtroom and it is not a confessional. It is a place where problems arrive and leave and you can see your day in the ledger at closing. At 4:58, she printed the dispatch summary without error and walked it to her manager instead of to me. I stayed in the bay and let the door frames do the talking. Respect is granted by process, not by surname. The manager initialed, gave her the next day's clipboard, and told her where the coffee is and where it isn't. I drafted a text I didn't send, proud of the minutes you just put in. I deleted it and wrote a note for tomorrow's clipboards instead. Names go where labor goes. Philosophy belongs where hands will see it at 7 a.m., not where hearts will overheat at 9 p.m. We locked the shop. Chargers ticked. A late van pulled in with the polite cough of a machine that still has 50,000 miles in it. I pictured Naomi setting an alarm for 6:30, not for a dress, but for a dispatch window. The repair had started, not with a speech, not with a hug, with a schedule and a chair and a day that expected her to show up again. 6 weeks is enough time for noise to cool into history you can search. Instead of weather, you have to stand in. By then, the shop had swallowed the clip like it swallows any story, turned it into a line on a calendar and a joke that dies after 3 tellings. Naomi's name sat on the rotation board without italics. Radios chattered, bins clacked, chargers blinked. Magnolia Hall was still throwing parties. I was still signing permits and approving time cards. The room of our lives felt 1 degree truer, not because anyone forgave anyone in a speech, but because the minutes stacked and didn't topple. The papers for Naomi and Julian arrived in the mail tray at her apartment, then in her email as a PDF that knew where to plant its signatures. Irreconcilable values, the language read, tidy, almost elegant. I didn't advise on love. I advised on documentation and safety. Keep your files, keep your hours, and don't let anger talk you into shortcuts you'll have to live under. On a Tuesday morning, she went to the courthouse annex, signed with a steady hand, and walked out at 9:10. I waited in the lobby, not the room, a coat on my arm in case the building's AC did what old buildings do. A clerk looked up, recognized something in my face from a stream she hadn't meant to watch, and gave a small, neutral nod. No spectacle, no confetti, just a civic process built to register change and move on. Naomi and I crossed paths at the door. We didn't hug for an audience that wasn't there. We talked about the shop's afternoon calls and whether the supplier had found the 16 by 25 filters without bent corners. You can mistake that kind of conversation for avoidance. It's not. It's a brace you build across a span that matters. Work moved the way work moves when a reputation rebalances. 2 maintenance contracts closed, mid-rise condos with aging mechanicals and boards tired of gambling on lowest bid. A small arts nonprofit retained us as safety sponsor for their courtyard season, not because I had been loud, but because I had been exact. A trade newsletter ran a short piece called "Why Clean Files Saved a Fancy Night." I declined the photo op and sent a line about systems and duty. They printed it next to a shot of one of our vans with a dent in the bumper I keep to remember one shear. In the quieter rooms where social gravity is measured, the Carringtons adjusted orbit. A committee seat Vivian treated like furniture slipped to someone else with a tidier ledger. A gala host duty transferred without fanfare. I didn't gloat. Doors close early for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes the hinge remembers who leaned on it too hard. Piper sent a formal apology about the sustainability grant misuse with a plan attached. Internal audit, vendor training, written policy, quarterly compliance checks. I accepted the plan and set a calendar reminder for 90 days to verify, because acceptance without verification is just decoration. She thanked me for grace. I didn't correct her. What I offered wasn't grace, it was procedure. Naomi's file began to show the kind of progress that matters after the clip count stops climbing. Dispatch error rate down by half, callback times tighter. One complex vendor call de-escalated with the script she once rolled her eyes at and now keeps taped inside a notebook. Her manager wrote a quiet commendation and slid it into the folder instead of onto a feed. On a Wednesday, she left a sticky on my desk that read, "Caught the mislabeled filter again." We split a late sandwich on the loading dock steps, half in shade, half in the gray honesty of a shop's evening. We talked about condensate traps and bad handwriting on model plates. It sounded like nothing. It felt like scaffolding. Aisha delivered a digital binder with a hard copy twin, contracts, permits, escrow logs, inspector emails, timestamps, receipts. She labeled it Savannah Wedding Completed. I filed it next to flooded basements and wind-damaged roofs. That's what the story was now. Another job closed with signatures where they belonged and pictures to prove what the room had felt. On River Street, I ran into Charles Whitaker without a lens to aim him. He offered a stiff apology for participating in the misunderstanding. I said one sentence a carpenter could respect. Names and receipts keep rooms from falling. No handshake, no scene. We let the river take what it always takes. Vivian tried a last email reframing the night as confusion under pressure. I forwarded it to the archive unopened. I won't debate the past with people who monetize drift. My reply lives in the binder's index. Naomi moved out of the extended stay and into a modest apartment closer to the shop with a month-to-month she could cover on her own paycheck. She bought a reliable used car and learned the ritual of oil change Saturdays in our lot. Coffee, torque wrench, a label on the windshield that tells the future you when you cared. I finally sent the text I drafted more than once and deleted. Proud of the minutes you've stacked. She replied with a photo of a clean dispatch board and the caption, "Oxygen feels better when you earn it." That evening, I drove past Magnolia Hall at dusk. Another wedding glowed behind the oaks, Edison bulbs learning their old trick again. I didn't think about the clip. I thought about start times and break schedules and whether we had enough dehumidifiers staged for the next storm line curling off the Gulf. Naomi's name sat on tomorrow's roster without italics. The design held. The work continues. When comfort is honest, it doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be there when people breathe. Savannah breathes differently at dusk, like the city loosens a hidden belt. On Whitaker, the oaks lean over the street in their old green, and the Spanish moss forgets whatever it saw last month, which is a mercy. I walk the park perimeter with the shop's hum still in my ears, the small chorus of chargers, the fridge clicking, a ratchet left to cool on steel. Headlines burn hot and fade fast. Systems survive because someone remembers maintenance. That's the rhythm that steadies me now, filters, forms, minutes that add up without applause. I rolled the truck to the curb outside Magnolia Hall and let it idle by the gate. Behind the fence, another reception warmed the glass, Edison bulbs blooming like tame constellations. I didn't get out. I didn't need to. A server laughed, sharp, small, honest, and the sound cleared the air more efficiently than any apology could. Joy belongs to the living, not the archive. It isn't threatened by the truth, it is improved by it. Theo's live stream did two things at once. It invited judgment and it preserved what happened with time stamps and sound. I don't love cameras, but I respect mirrors. A mirror can't help you if your files are crooked. It can't hurt you if your paperwork and your conduct line up. That's what I tell my crews now when the world points a lens at people who are trying to keep air moving. Carry receipts, I say, not rage. Rage runs hot and burns fuel. Receipts keep the lights honest. Here's the credo I earned the hard way. Put the right name where the work lives and oxygen flows better. Credit vented Draghi correctly is not vanity, it's ventilation. Applause is fast and evaporates. Acknowledgement is slow and structural. When a clause requires a sentence, it isn't pettiness, it's ductwork for dignity. We run wire where current should go. We run respect the same way. People call contracts hard, but the longer I live, the more I think of them as compassionate. A permit is a promise that strangers will be safe inside someone else's celebration. A clause is a hand on the shoulder of a person time would like to erase. Aisha sent me that tidy binder labeled Savannah Wedding Completed, and I filed it under jobs we finished without breaking anything we couldn't repair. Paper can be a kind of care when it is used to keep people from being crushed by performance. At home, Naomi sets a 6:30 alarm and packs a lunch like the rest of us. She lays out a clean clipboard and checks her pins the way a tech checks his bit set. The ritual is the apology, not a paragraph. This week she trained a new hire on the de-escalation script. Watching her explain the pauses, what to say, and more importantly, when to stop talking, felt like seeing a tool survive because someone used it kindly. It wasn't a triumph, it was a good shift. Boundaries still do their work. When another reframe email arrived from Vivian, I forwarded it to the archive unopened. Piper's 90-day compliance check came back clean. I replied with a single word, received. Procedure, not performance. I don't chase history around the block. I maintain my part of the street. Savannah has its own compact of quiet respect. A vendor in a white van waved the way working people do at a traffic light, two fingers barely off the wheel. A homeowner dropped off a pecan pie for the crew, and the box was empty before lunch. None of that fixes the world. All of it makes the day human enough to keep going. Our father-daughter cadence is built on notes, not areas. After a shift, Naomi left a sticky on my desk, called Mrs. Ellis back in 6 minutes. I wrote good tempo and slid it onto her clipboard for morning. No hug, no orchestra swell. rhythm instead of sentiment, which is what most machines need to run without rattling themselves apart. I could watch the clip and measure the faces for changes, but that's not the work. I keep the ledger and the lesson. If I take one sentence out of that heat and carry it forward, it is this: joy survives truth. The room did not collapse when my name was spoken where it belonged. It breathed better. If you're reading this from a swing door or a service corridor or the cab of a truck that smells like solder and lemon cleaner, here is what I think matters. You are not invisible if your files are in order and your name is where it belongs. The world may be slow to see you until something goes wrong. See yourself anyway. If the moment comes when you must step into the light, carry receipts, not rage, put the sentence where the contract says it goes, then put the mic back on its clip and let the system do what it was designed to do. I don't pretend there won't be other mistakes. People forget. Systems creak. Vanity shows up in new costumes and asks to be seated at the head table. Our answer will be the same. Maintain the ducks, check the gauges, speak the name once. No more, no less. If the room keeps its promises, we keep our hands off the switch. If it doesn't, we honor the design that protects everyone. My personal seal is only a sentence, but I've found it holds. Names go where labor goes. Put them there and watch the air improve. Put them elsewhere and feel the room suffocate on theater. That's not philosophy. That's physics you can breathe. On the drive home, I cracked the windows and let the night move through the cab. The truck's bench seat held tomorrow's clipboard, first work order on top with Naomi's initials neat in the corner. A tugboat horn sounded from the river and the cicadas traded shifts. I thought about oil change Saturday and the dehumidifier stage for whatever weather decides to do next. Not triumph, not regret, maintenance. That's the life I know how to live, and for the first time in a while, it felt like the room I share with my daughter could hold the same air. In the quiet after any storm, what remains are the systems we kept and the choices we honored. Some nights test whether comfort is just a feeling or a promise carried by work, signatures, and the willingness to say one true sentence when it matters. The lesson is simple enough to miss. Put credit where the labor lives, keep your files clean, and let design, not impulse, decide the outcome. When truth is spoken with a steady hand, the room does not collapse. It finally learns how to breathe. There's a difference between applause and acknowledgement. Applause is fast, bright, evaporative. Acknowledgement is structural. It directs oxygen to the places that keep a life standing. We learn that contracts are not cages but forms of compassion. They protect the unseen hands. They steady the celebration. They keep the vulnerable from being edited out when the lights come up. And we learn that restraint is not weakness. It is a craft. Hold the line. Document reality, and when called for, act without spectacle. Carry receipts, not rage. Rage burns hot and ends quickly. Receipts keep the lights honest. The world will always offer clever shortcuts, grandstanding, denial, rewrites of cause and effect. But integrity works like ventilation. It isn't dramatic, it is dependable. It hums under the music, it keeps the heat where it belongs, and moves the air so everyone can stay in the room. When we honor that, outcomes take care of themselves. Doors that should close, close. Doors that should open, open. Respect stops being a speech and becomes a schedule. In the end, the work of repair looks ordinary from the outside. It's small minutes, stacked. It's the habit of showing up on time, writing things down, owning the line you cross and the line you keep. It's the humility to fix what you can, archive what you must, and trust that the next right task will present itself. And it's the courage to place a name where a name belongs once, then move forward without gloating or apology. If you've carried a room quietly, if you've stood by a swing door making comfort invisible, take this as permission to value what doesn't shout. Keep your receipts, keep your word. Speak the truth with the volume of a promise, not a performance. Joy survives truth. In fact, it needs it. Thank you for sharing your time and attention. We'd love to hear what resonated, what line you'll carry into your own work, what moment shifted how you think about credit, duty, or repair. Drop your reflections in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Your perspectives turn stories into a community of practice. If this kind of storytelling adds something steady to your day, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Share this with someone who keeps rooms running without applause. Your voice keeps this space honest, and your presence helps the next person breathe a little easier.